You're listening to the Parents of Hardworking Teens podcast, episode 124. Why busy work does not equal productive, useful, or impactful work. Stay tuned to discover where your teen could be saving their time and energy and how they could be increasing their productivity with a much bigger impact on their results. I'm Katie Jones, and with over 15 years in education as an award-winning high school teacher, international external examiner, and as a study coach, I've helped thousands of students skyrocket their results and confidence. And this podcast is where I share all my insights, tactics, and tips with you, the parent, so you can help your hardworking teen get happy, smart, and successful in their study, and have you both enjoy the journey along the way. This is the Parents of Hardworking Teens podcast. Hey VIPs, how are you? I hope you and your teens are doing great and feeling positive. I have something for you today that is one of those good news, bad news topics, because even if studying looks active, it doesn't necessarily mean any actual learning is happening. That's the bad news. The good news is that when we recognize this, we can cut out any of the ineffective learning and either switch it to something much more effective, which will positively impact results, or we can confidently cut out anything that isn't actually making a difference and have some free time for other things which will positively impact your teen's life balance instead. I had such a good example of this happen to me this Christmas. Confession, I have actually had this topic in mind to do a podcast episode on for a little while, but I'm only getting to it now because I decided to do a bit of up-to-date new research around active revision, active processing of information, and effective long-term learning. Because this was such a great real-life example of distinguishing active versus passive learning, or passive not learning, even in this case, when from an observer's perspective, the activity itself looked very active indeed. Now, I've talked before about active versus passive revision back in episode 52. I will link it in the show notes so you can go check that out. But I really want to emphasize today that active is the active cognition, not the actual activity that is happening. Now, this was perfectly demonstrated by me and my terrible lack of quiz learning, despite it being a fun and engaging and active on the surface level at Christmas. So as you've previously heard me share, I had my dad over to visit for Christmas and New Year from the UK. And one of the things that we all enjoy doing together is like quiz type games. Nothing too hardcore. I am terrible, really, at general knowledge, but something a little bit more lighthearted and fun is always good. And any of you who host family will know what it is like to be together 24/7 for a prolonged period of time. You need something to sometimes just help the conversation along and take the pressure off of being the hostess sometimes. So I bought us this game as a kind of joint Christmas gift. It was called I Should Have Known That. Now, it's basically just quiz cards with a bit of fancy scoring, to be honest. And after a while, we even dropped the scoring. And it was a little bit easier than I expected. That is not a lightly veiled brag. Like I said, I'm pretty rubbish at general knowledge kind of quizzes. The questions were, yes, things that most people would probably know. And if I know it, then yes, the name is accurate. Most people probably should know that. But of course, there were questions that I didn't know. And in those cases, whenever one of us didn't know the answer, the question asker or question master in that moment would just reel off the answer. And sometimes we'd have a bit of discussion around it. And sometimes we'd just move on. Now, I didn't think much about this until we came back to these cards a few weeks later. Because we did get through all of the cards in this game over the course of my dad's visit. And we even ended up coming back to them when we were sat on the last day of his visit. You know, when you're sort of awkwardly waiting around for an evening flight. So we were waiting to take him to the airport. And I hate that, where you can't really go do anything because you're all kind of packed. But you've also then got time to kill before you go to the airport. So one of the things we did was he got out these cards and we decided to re-quiz each other on the questions that we'd gotten wrong. And guess what? For me, at least, I had learned nothing new. Every card that I got wrong the first time, when I was asked it again, I had not registered or remembered the answers that I'd been told previously at all. And this was in a time frame of just 2.5 weeks. Now, yes, of course, I wasn't exactly using the cards or questions as like a study technique. I wasn't going to be sitting any exams on any of this. So I wasn't necessarily purposely trying to commit any of that information to memory. But I would have thought that I might have remembered some of the new facts or pieces of information. And it really made me think about how many students are revising using flashcards or by quizzing each other with their friends. It is a pretty common method, right? And it really struck me that this kind of quizzing and checking of answers, it does look more engaging and active than just reading over information or writing out notes. It seems active and interactive. But for me at least, it still didn't stick. And so with that, and some recent discussions about active versus passive learning and revision, I've been and done some more research to see what others are saying about this currently, because this is not a new concept at all. I was taught this concept of active learning and processing information and active revision back in my teacher training, way back in 2005. But of course, there's always new research or findings happening when it comes to how we learn and how our brains work. And I want to share one piece of writing that I came across. Now, bear with me because it's actually an article reflecting on a comment that was posted below another article. Now, I will link this in the show notes so you could go see the full trail if you want to. But this is an article by Blake Harvard called The Myth of Passive Learning. And here's what struck me. First of all, it was the comment that was made by a different reader who said, the term passive learning is an oxymoron. There is no such thing. If students are learning, then they are not passive, and learning does not always include moving or talking. So what they are saying is this is about active thinking and active cognition. It is not just looking active or displaying some kind of activity. And then secondly, in response to this comment, the author of the article then goes on to say, without mentally attending to material or information, there can be no learning. The idea of passive learning versus active learning as an outward expression of engagement is very misleading. A student can look active with their learning because they are having a discussion with others or using a manipulative, but without assessment of the student's cognition, we, students and teachers, should not assume learning has occurred. Now, I think this is a big deal. That just because we have produced something on paper or nodded along in class because it made sense when the teacher explained it, it may or may not mean that the information has been engaged with, understood, and processed in a way that means the learner has truly learned it, can explain it for themselves, independently, in any way that it is asked for. Now, I also like this commentary because it emphasizes that being active doesn't mean it has to be creative or visually busy learning. I mean, I was living proof of this as a high school student. I have particularly strong memories of practical chemistry lessons where we'd be shown what to do for an experiment and then in groups we'd have to go do it. And I vividly remember not having a clue what was happening, what we were supposed to be doing, and how it related to the theory that we're supposed to be learning. Now, luckily, because we were in groups, I would be helping and participating and basically fumbling my way through this experiment with the help of my friends or my group. And to the teacher, it would have looked like I was engaged and active, but I honestly had no real idea of what we were doing or why we were doing it. But I can tell you, I was not making any connections between what was happening in the experiment and what we were doing and what we were testing and the theory or the concept that we were supposedly learning. And this is why I always say it's not about the actual format. It's not about the flashcards or the table summary or the model making or whatever it is that's actually being produced. It's about the process and the act of mentally transforming material, processing information, concepts from one format into another. So it's not that writing notes is a passive exercise in itself. but it is if it's just copying or paraphrasing from an existing text. But it isn't if the notes are being made from the original format of an image or a diagram that requires active thinking and taking that information and constructing those notes from the knowledge and understanding of that image or diagram. And it's not that making some cool looking model is automatically active. If it didn't require any active thinking or any true understanding in order to create it, then it's a passive activity, even though it might look very active. But if it's a model based on having read some information, watched an explanation, and then crafting that model represents those concepts or processes, then that is active. So this is about increasing awareness around what your teen is spending their time and effort on and not falling into passive study. Because passive study is a problem for two reasons. Firstly, it is frankly a waste of time that could be spent on doing things that would be much more effective. And notice that I've said time and not effort there, because like I said at the start, passive study does not require much effort, at least not mentally. It might involve practical effort to write out pages and pages of notes, but that doesn't mean that there has been any cognitive load lifted. Now, unfortunately, that's the reason so many students end up using these strategies, because they feel easy. And this is the second problem. They also feel like they are being productive because they are producing all these pages of notes. But as a double negative, that feeling of being productive because they wrote out all of those notes or made that mega model is now creating a false sense of security and productivity and like a superficial level of confidence. They might feel accomplished for the physical or visible output produced, but the truth is that the mental work just isn't there. So if your teen ever feels just exhausted and really needs to do something that they feel is easy, then honestly, they may well just be better off taking a break to recharge or stepping away to do something enjoyable or just something different and coming back later. Because honestly, they could spend a whole day on passive study or passive revision techniques and output, and it would not be as effective as spending 1 hour on focused, mentally active and effective study. So I share all of this to hopefully help you support your teen in making smarter decisions about what and how they are studying, how they're using their time and energy, and becoming more aware of that active engagement mentally, not just on a practical level. Remember, as Blake said, a student can look active with their learning, but without assessment of the student's cognition, we, students and teachers, should not assume learning has occurred. So it's up to the teacher in the classroom, but the student in their own independent study to ensure that they are using strategies and activities that ensure learning is occurring and doesn't just create the illusion of it. Now, if you'd like your teen to gain and use active study and revision strategies, then check out my 10-week grade transformation program. I have a whole module just dedicated to this one concept. I'll put a direct link in the show notes, or you can go to the Rock Solid Study website and click on program. I will see you back here for the next episode. Until then, have a beautiful rest of your day, and I'll see you soon. Bye. If you're ready to have your teen achieve their best possible results with less stress, then I want to invite you to enroll them in the 10-week grade transformation program, where they're going to learn the key concepts, skills, and strategies to catapult their performance in assessments and exams. It's risk-free. They either achieve bigger and better results with a whole lot more confidence in 10 weeks, or we refund you in full. Just head over to www.rocksolidstudy.com/program, and I'll see you there.